Blizzard outside. Silence inside. A winter tent glows faintly, and a family settles in for the night. How did they sleep through sub-zero cold and wake up warm? It wasn't one trick. It was a system. The way the tent was shaped to trap heat. The hidden layer you don't see from the outside. The fire that breathed without choking the sleepers. The bed that wasn't really on the ground. The furs that worked like a living thermostat. And yes, a clever little heat source you'd never expect to find a tent at midnight. We'll step inside, lift the flap, and show how design airflow and smart layering turned winter from an enemy into a manageable guest. Tell me the exact time you're watching dawn, midnight, or somewhere in between. If you want more clear, simple history deep dives like this tap, like so this story reaches more people. You wake up to the sound of your own breath, sharp, white, and visible. Frost clings to your lashes. The air bites harder than coffee ever could, and yet somehow you're alive. The thin hide walls around you flutter with the wind. But inside this tipi, this fragile cone of poles and skin, you're warm enough to move your fingers. How is that even possible? The winter plains stretch outside like a frozen sea. Temperatures plunge below what your weather app would call, please don't. But inside the temperature dances somewhere between manageable and surprisingly cozy. Welcome to the North American winter camp, where people slept through minus 30 degrees without electric blankets, without Gore-Tex, and without complaining, at least not much. The secret begins with the tent itself. It's more than a shelter. It's a machine designed by instinct and refinement. Each pole is set at a precise angle so smoke escapes while heat stays. The hides overlap like scales tightening when the air grows colder. You'd think that thousands of years of architectural progress would beat a few bison hides on sticks. But here's the twist, it doesn't. You brush your hand over the inner wall, smooth on one side, furry on the other. The hair faces inward, trapping warmth the way double-pane windows do today. When the wind howls outside, the teepee sighs, but never shivers. Even modern campers who've tried to copy it admit it's an engineering marvel hidden inside a circle of dirt. At the center, the fire burns low and steady. It's not the kind of blaze you'd roast marshmallows over, more like the heartbeat of the camp. A tripod of stones cradles glowing embers that last through the night. Someone wakes every few hours to feed it a quiet ritual older than any alarm clock. You can almost hear the crackle mixing with the soft breathing of sleepers curled under piles of hides. If you've ever spent a night in a nylon tent, you know how loud cold can be, the fabric snapping the ground, sucking warmth from your spine. The teepee fixes all that. Its floor is layered first pine branches, then woven mats, then hides, then blankets of fur. Each layer traps air, each air pocket traps heat. It's insulation by patience. Outside, snowdrifts pile against the base like nature's own windbreak. Inside, your toes are thawing. You pull a buffalo robe tighter around your shoulders, and suddenly the phrase, "sleep like a log," makes perfect sense. There's a rhythm to this life. Children sleep closest to the back elders near the fire, everyone aligned in quiet symmetry. The layout isn't random, it's physics mixed with respect. The fire warms evenly, and no one is left in the cold. Even in sleep, community protects. And yet it's not just engineering that keeps them alive. It's understanding the land like an old friend. Every breeze, every snowflake has a pattern, a message. They knew which side of the valley trapped warmth, which trees whispered of an oncoming storm. While you and I check forecasts, they read the clouds like scripture. You breathe deeply, tasting smoke and fur and something ancient resilience. Somewhere beyond the hides, wolves sing to the horizon. The wind sighs across the prairie, curious why this small cone of humanity refuses to freeze. Would you survive a night here? Maybe, but only if you learned what they already knew. Warmth isn't just about heat, it's about harmony. And as the firelight flickers across the hides, your eyelids grow heavy. The tent exhales with you, its thin skin shimmering like a heartbeat. For a moment you almost forget the cold waiting outside. You just hear the steady living pulse of ingenuity centuries old, still undefeated by frost. The fire still glows when morning drags itself over the horizon, pale and blue. You step outside and the cold slaps you awake so hard it almost feels personal. The ground creaks beneath your boots like cracking glass. You look back at the teepee smoke curling lazily from its top and realize it's not just a shelter. It's a symphony of angles, tension, and air. Every stick, every flap, every gap exists for a reason. You crouch beside one of the poles, its smooth pine stripped and tapered to fit perfectly into the earth. 12 to 20 poles, depending on the tribe, come together at the top, laced with rawhide like ribs forming a chest. They lean outward to form that familiar cone, the aerodynamic miracle that sheds snow and shrugs off wind. Modern architects might call it self-ventilating structural efficiency. The Lakota just called it home. At the base, the hides are pinned tight to the ground with stones or wooden pegs, but not completely sealed. That small gap, it's intentional. Fresh air enters there, rises with the heat from the fire, and escapes through the smoke flaps above, creating a natural draft. The teepee breathes. It never traps smoke, never suffocates you. Some scientists tested it centuries later and realized it performs better than most contemporary chimneys. You have to respect an invention that never needed an upgrade. And those smoke flaps at the top two triangular wings aren't decorative either. They can be angled with poles from inside to direct airflow depending on the wind. Imagine lying under a mountain of buffalo hides, adjusting your ceiling vents with a stick while half asleep. It's the prehistoric version of central heating. Inside, there's geometry disguised as simplicity. The fire pit sits precisely in the center, ensuring equal heat distribution. Around it, hides form an inner liner that traps rising warmth, while cold air slides harmlessly down between layers. If you've ever worn a double-layered jacket, you've already copied this idea without realizing it. Nature and necessity were the first architects. Mathematics came later. Every nation had its own flair. The Blackfoot favored tall, narrow teepees, good for shedding snow on windy plains. The Cheyenne preferred wider bases for family gatherings. Some painted stories on their hides, battles, visions, dreams. So while the teepee kept you alive, it also told who you were. Warmth and identity stitched together by hand. You take a slow step inside again, ducking under the low entrance flap. The heat hits you like a sigh. Even your breath sounds quieter here. The hide walls glow amber from the firelight, and shadows of poles stretch like ribs across the ceiling. It feels alive, like being inside a breathing animal that shelters you with patience. The genius wasn't just design, it was mobility. Everything could be packed within an hour. The poles doubled as travois frames for horses or dogs to drag. The hides rolled tight lightweight when dry, heavy enough when pitched to stop a blizzard. When winter moved, the people moved with it. Warmth wasn't something you built once it was something you followed. There's a kind of humility in that. Today we build houses to defy nature. They built theirs to negotiate with it. The teepee doesn't fight the wind, it listens to it. It bends, flexes, flows. Maybe that's why it survived centuries of storms without splintering. And if you think of it, every home, since then, igloos, yurts, cabins, condos, owes something to this circle. The teepee isn't primitive. It's perfect. You can almost picture some modern engineer with a laptop and measuring tools standing here squinting at the angles, mumbling. They figured this out without CAD software. Snow drifts past the entrance as you settle near the fire again. The smoke curls upward, lazy and sure, disappearing into the sky. It's hypnotic. You realize that warmth here isn't just physical. It's architectural empathy. A home that breathes with you, not against you. The wind howls again outside, pushing against the hide like a giant hand. The teepee flexes, sighs, then straightens. You exhale, and for a moment you could swear it exhales with you. It's not a tent. It's a living machine, older than blueprints, wiser than walls. The fire crackles low, and the scent of hide and wood smoke wraps around you like a blanket that's half memory, half miracle. Tonight, the real warmth doesn't come from flames. It comes from the layers of fur and skin that turn a death sentence of cold into comfort. You run your hand across a buffalo robe stretched near the hearth. The outer side feels rough, but the inner side is dense, silky, almost alive. Hair turned inward traps air close to your body, creating invisible pockets of insulation. The same idea hides inside modern down jackets, only this version was invented centuries earlier with no blueprints, just experience. Each buffalo hide tells a story. Some are scarred from hunts, others are painted with suns, storms, or dreams. They aren't just bedding, they're the biography of survival. Tribes like the Lakota and Cheyenne swaddled themselves under these massive pelts, each one weighing more than a sack of flour. 2 hides beneath you, 2 above, and the winter became a rumor instead of a threat. When buffalo were scarce, the people turned to other gifts: elk for its softness, deer for its flexibility, bear for its heaviness and spiritual weight. The Cree in the north loved beaver fur because it resisted moisture and stayed warm even when damp, a priceless trait when the snow turned to slush. Every type of hide had a purpose chosen not by luxury, but by logic. Imagine the nightly ritual before sleep, someone shaking out the hides, someone else checking the stitching, another sprinkling a handful of sage or sweetgrass near the fire for scent and peace. It's all quiet choreography, unspoken and steady. The result is something better than any bed you've known, soft, layered, breathing warmth from the earth itself. The floor is a masterpiece of patience. Beneath the hides, there's a layer of reeds or grass mats, then branches of pine or spruce, all designed to trap air and block frost from creeping up. That trapped air is the secret weapon. It slows the cold, turns it back. Even when the fire dies down, the heat lingers in those layers, refusing to leave. Archaeologists later found fragments of such bedding, and when tested, they kept warmth better than wool. It's proof that comfort doesn't always need innovation. Sometimes it just needs attention. Inside this quiet cocoon, warmth feels earned. It doesn't rush toward you. It arrives slowly, like trust. Someone always stays half awake to feed the fire, keeping the ember alive, with the care of a heartbeat. You might wake once to see their shadow moving by the glow, silent as breath, before the orange light fades again to dark. The hides smell faintly of smoke, pine, and thyme, an earthy perfume that seeps into dreams. Modern campers buy candles that imitate this scent. Here it's simply the smell of life continuing. The air hums softly with breath and fire. Somewhere near the entrance, A dog sighs in its sleep, curled so tight its fur trembles with warmth. You turn on your side, the robe heavy but kind. Every layer around you was made by hands that understood cold better than science ever could. It's not just insulation, it's empathy, a dialogue between people and the land. The hides aren't trophies, they're gratitude stitched into survival. Outside snowdrifts whisper against the tent, but inside the warmth holds steady. The cold is patient, but so are you. Wrapped in the fur of the animal that once roamed the same plains, you feel connected not just to warmth, but to an entire way of thinking. Nothing wasted, nothing taken for granted, nothing left unlearned. The wind outside changes its voice. It doesn't howl, now it hums. You wake to the sound of embers, shifting the faint hiss of snow hitting the smoke hole and melting instantly. The fire at the heart of the teepee is still alive. Barely. You reach for the nearest stick and nudge the coals, and the orange glow blooms again, soft as sunrise. And here's the truth that never fails to impress this fire, small and quiet, is the only thing standing between life and ice. There's no roaring blaze, no cinematic inferno. Just a low, patient flame that burns all night, guarded like a secret. Fires in these winter lodges were tended not for spectacle, but for balance. Too much heat and smoke thickens the air. Too little and frost creeps into your bones. The people who lived this way didn't waste a single spark. They tuned it the way a musician tunes a drum. You watch how the smoke rises perfectly through the flaps above. No panic, no chaos. The teepee's shape creates its own ventilation, pulling fresh air from the ground, feeding oxygen to the fire and carrying smoke away. No chimney needed. It's as though the structure itself breathes, exhaling warmth in exchange for survival. Someone always stayed awake to feed it. Every few hours, a hand reached out from beneath a fur blanket to lay on another log. It wasn't assigned duty, it was instinct. Life depended on those embers never dying. Whole families rotated the task without argument. Imagine that kind of unspoken teamwork, where one person's drowsy kindness keeps everyone else dreaming safely. Firewood, of course, was currency. Camps near river valleys stored bundles high off the ground, wrapped in hides to keep them dry. Cottonwood, willow, or pine, each burned differently, each chosen for purpose. Cottonwood for steady coals, pine for a quick flame willow, for a soft scent that masked smoke. Every stick was known, every spark respected. And it wasn't just about heat. The fire was the living center of the home. Meals cooked there, stories unfolded. Their prayers drifted upward through its smoke. Some elders believed that the fire carried words to the ancestors, that every crackle was an answer from the other side. When the world outside froze solid, the flames reminded everyone that warmth didn't belong to summer. It belonged to those who knew how to make it last. You can see a child stirring, rubbing their eyes, then crawling toward the fire with a small bundle of twigs. They blow gently, and the embers pulse brighter. That's the education here. No lectures, no books, just action. You don't learn survival by being told. You learn it by tending a flame at 4 a.m, your breath making the difference between smoke and light. And let's be honest, modern heating feels lazy in comparison. You twist a thermostat. They negotiated with nature. Their fire wasn't just warmth, it was discipline art and meditation rolled into one. If mindfulness apps existed, then this would be the sound they played, the hiss of wet wood, drying, the pop of sap bursting, the sigh of heat returning. You stretch your hands toward the glow. The flames don't roar, they whisper. Shadows climb the hide walls, bending and shrinking like dancers. You start to notice how this light shapes the night differently. It doesn't banish darkness, it softens it. The people here didn't fight winter. They learned to hum along with it. As the fire steadies again, the teepee's ceiling seems to shimmer with smoke and breath. The space feels smaller now, closer, safer. The cold outside might be merciless, but inside balance reigns. The flames don't have to be big, they just have to endure. You lie back listening to the fire settle into its rhythm. There's a comfort in knowing that a few glowing coals, a circle of stone, and a patient hand can outwit the fiercest season on earth. The fire sighs once more, and the night hums its agreement. The warmth tonight feels different, quieter, steadier, earned. The teepee hums faintly as the wind presses against it, and for the first time, you notice how much heat comes not just from the fire, but from the people themselves. Bodies, breath, and closeness, all part of the design. The ancient architects of this life understood something our thermostats forget: warmth is a shared invention. When everyone settles in for the night, it's never random. The sleeping arrangement itself is a kind of thermal engineering. Elders rest closest to the fire, their bones grateful for its steady glow. Children sleep in the back, bundled beneath the thickest hides, where the air is calmest. The adults form a living ring between bodies, angled limbs, overlapping breaths, sinking unconsciously until the whole lodge feels like one slow heartbeat. You shift a little, testing it. Two people lying close can raise the temperature by several degrees. A whole family can turn a freezing night into comfort just by existing together. It's not romance, not even affection. It's science powered by trust. The air between bodies becomes insulation, the same way snow traps heat inside an igloo. Every exhale adds warmth. Every inhale carries the scent of fir smoke and familiarity. And yes, it's intimate but not awkward. Out here, modesty yields to necessity. You share warmth the way you share air. In the darkness, no one thinks about appearances. They think about breath, staying steady, toes, staying warm. The rhythm of sleeping humans and glowing fire becomes its own lullaby. In the far north, Cree families built similar sleeping circles, layering spruce boughs beneath them for softness and scent. The branches released a resinous perfume, when crushed, part insulation, part comfort. The Ojibwe added mats of cat-tail reeds on top, smooth and slightly waxy, so that snowmelt never reached their hides. Everything served both body and spirit. Sometimes dogs curled beside the sleepers, pressed close for warmth. Their fur radiated heat, their breathing steady as drums. The animals weren't just companions, they were part of the temperature system. When a storm howled outside, humans and animals together made a furnace of heartbeat and trust. There's something almost mathematical about it. Heat rises, cold sinks, so bedding low to the ground helps until you add a floor of branches, then hides, then furs, layering warmth upward until it reaches your skin. The teepee's sloped walls trap that rising heat and swirl it around like soup in a pot. What you end up with isn't luxury. It's equilibrium. You imagine a winter morning long before sunrise. The fire is embers, the teepee dim. A baby stirs, and without a word, the nearest hand tucks the robe tighter around them. The air smells faintly of wood smoke, and people raw, human, real. You realize that what modern life calls personal space simply didn't exist here. Survival had erased the need for walls between bodies. It's strange how modern heating makes us colder to each other. We build houses so warm, we no longer need one another's warmth at all. We forget that sharing body heat isn't primitive. It's profoundly human. For them, warmth wasn't isolation. It was community made literal. You lie back again, letting that thought drift. The teepee's air moves gently as everyone breathes together. The sound is barely there, a soft ocean of exhalations, the rustle of fur, the faint crack of cooling embers. Somewhere snow slides off the hide walls with a sigh. The storm outside is relentless, but inside the temperature never falters. Even without speaking, you can sense the trust that built this moment. Generations perfected this choreography. Fire hides breath, stillness. It isn't magic. It's knowledge practiced until it became instinct. The warmth around you isn't just heat. It's a heartbeat shared across centuries. You close your eyes and let it carry you like a slow tide of safety, pulling you deeper into the night. By morning, the snow outside is piled high enough to swallow a horse's leg. Yet inside the lodge, it feels like early spring. The miracle isn't the fire, it's the insulation. You sit up slowly, listening to the faint creak of hides as they tighten in the cold. Every inch of this shelter, from the floor to the smoke flaps, has been tuned to the physics of survival. The air is warm because every wall, every layer, every trick of material has been rehearsed 1,000 winters over. One of the cleverest tricks was turning snow the enemy into an ally. After pitching, the teepee families often piled snow around the outer edge, forming a low bank that sealed drafts. Snow, paradoxically, is an insulator. Its tiny air pockets trap heat just like fur. So while the outside world froze, the snow wrapped the home in silence and stillness. When wind howled across the plains, the teepee stood calm, cushioned by its own enemy. You peek outside through the flap. The cold burns your face instantly, and your breath crystallizes. A man nearby is carving blocks of packed snow, stacking them into a curved wall that breaks the wind. In forest regions, others used evergreen branches or reeds for the same purpose, anything to stop the invisible fingers of air that steal warmth. The idea was simple. You can't fight the cold directly, but you can outsmart how it moves. Back inside, you notice the floor again. Beneath the hides lies a world of small genius. First come the pine boughs layered like green feathers. Over that woven mats of cattail reeds, smooth and firm. On top of everything, the hides sometimes double, sometimes triple, depending on the season. Each layer traps a breath of air, and each breath becomes part of the heat. The result isn't just insulation, it's softness. You can lie down and feel the ground disappear beneath you, replaced by a steady warmth that seems to come from nowhere. People didn't just endure winter, they sculpted it. In some regions, snow itself was part of the architecture. The Cree built snow houses beside their tents to store meat and tools, using them as extra insulation walls. The Inuit perfected the idea farther north, stacking snow blocks into igloos so warm that inside temperatures reached 50 degrees warmer than the outside. Same principle, different landscape. The genius was universal air. Is warmth and control, the air you control the cold. Even the fire pit showed subtle engineering. Stones around the edges absorbed heat during the night and released it slowly once the flames dimmed. When you see the faint red glow on those rocks before dawn, you understand that ancient people didn't wait for technology, they were technology. They simply built it with muscle patience and observation instead of steel and wires. As the day brightens, you hear soft laughter outside. A few people are brushing snow away from the teepee's base, checking for cracks in the bank. The rhythm of their work is almost meditative: brush, pack, pat, repeat. They talk lightly, their breath hanging in the air like speech bubbles in slow motion. Survival here isn't panic, it's routine. You get the sense that no one fears winter, they negotiate with it daily. You sit near the door, pulling the hide flap aside to let in a strip of sunlight. It pours over the floor, catching motes of smoke and dust in a glowing current. The warmth feels almost sacred, earned through centuries of adaptation. You can't help thinking how many generations refined this same design. How each winter was a teacher, how every mistake carved knowledge deeper into memory. Modern life chases insulation through fiberglass and foam. But here it came from relationship with animals, with plants, with the elements themselves. Nothing wasted, nothing guessed. Just a deep understanding that comfort isn't built against nature, but with it. You rest your hand on the ground. It's soft, warm, almost alive. The snow outside can roar all it wants. And here you sit inside the quiet intelligence of human survival. The hides breathe, the floor exhales, and for a brief moment you understand why the people of these plains never called it suffering. They called it living. The snowstorm has passed, leaving the world silver and silent. You lie beneath a mountain of firs, your breath rising in soft plumes, the air scented faintly with wood ash and sage. Outside, the stars return sharp, cold, endless. And just before sleep takes you, someone begins to hum. The sound is low, steady, ancient. A song that was never written down, but always remembered. That's the hook that catches your breath tonight in this freezing world. Stories were the warmest thing of all. Every culture that slept through these winters understood something we often forget. Dreams are a form of heat. Long before electric light, long before bedtime screens, warmth came from voices and imagination. The night wasn't just for rest. It was for storytelling. When the fire dimmed to coals, someone, often an elder, would start speaking softly, not to teach, but to carry everyone safely through the darkness. You can almost hear it, the rasp of an old man's voice, blending with the wind. He tells of a coyote who tricked the winter spirits, or of a hero who climbed the northern lights. Children listen half awake, their eyes half shut, each word curling into their dreams. The fire pops. Snow sighs against the hides, and the story weaves warmth through the air thicker than smoke. It wasn't just entertainment. It was medicine. In these stories lived memory, history, and belonging. A good tale could outlast frostbite, hunger, even fear. It reminded every listener why they were still here and why the cold could never win. Modern people might fall asleep to podcasts or playlists. Here they had the original lullaby, the sound of ancestors reminding you who you are. The dreams that followed were their own kind of survival. Hunters dreamed of tracks to follow, healers dreamed of herbs buried under snow, mothers dreamed of the bison herds returning in spring. These weren't fantasies, they were instructions. A night's sleep could bring a vision that guided the tribe's next move or a warning of storms ahead. The body rested, but the spirit kept working. Even the tipi itself seemed built for dreaming. Its circular shape mirrored the sky. Its smoke hole aligned with the stars. Some said each teepee was a model of the universe, the fire as the sun, the poles as the connection between earth and spirit. The smoke rising as prayers. You didn't just sleep in it, you slept within a cosmos. And so they drifted between waking and dreaming, the line blurred by rhythm and flame. Some nights laughter would ripple through the lodge, small jokes shared to chase away fear. The wolves sing better than I do, someone might murmur. Another voice answers, then let them sing us warm. You smile because you know exactly what that means. Cold makes you honest, and humor keeps you alive. There were other kinds of warmth, too. The warmth of knowing you weren't alone. Imagine falling asleep, hearing your grandmother's voice, your cousin's breathing, your friend's soft snore. Every sound means belonging. The cold outside is infinite, but here inside it's full of names and faces. That's the kind of insulation no material can replace. You can picture the last ember flickering the shadows, slowing on the hide walls, the hum of a drum fading somewhere outside. The stars peek through the smoke hole bright enough to touch. It's in this half-light that sleep comes not as an escape, but as an agreement between the living and the world around them. You pull the robe closer, feeling its weight anchor you to the earth. The cold will return tomorrow just as it always does. But tonight the stories are enough. They travel through your chest, steady and warm until even the snow outside seems to pause and listen. And as your eyes finally close, the world turns soft again. The kind of silence where history whispers, sleep. We've done this before, and we will do it again. When the sun returns, the camp is already moving. Smoke thins in the cold air, poles creak. Snow crunches under moccasins. You realize now that survival here was never about building a perfect home. It was about knowing when to leave it. The people of the plains and forests didn't just conquer winter. They danced with it. Their true warmth came not from staying still, but from knowing exactly when to move. The nomadic rhythm was its own kind of intelligence. When the buffalo herd shifted, the camp followed. When snow buried one valley too deep, they sought another where the wind shaped shelter out of the land itself. It wasn't random wandering. It was a choreography written by centuries of observation. They knew which rivers froze last, which ridges caught the morning sun, which trees bent before a blizzard hit. Every movement was a line of poetry composed with instinct instead of ink. You help roll a hide, its smoky scent clinging to your fingers. The teepee collapses neatly, no waste, no chaos. The poles become travois frames again lashed behind horses or dogs. Children gather embers into a clay pot, carrying the old fire to seed the next one. Nothing ends it, just transforms. That you realize is the real definition of warmth continuity. The wind today is sharp, but the people walk lightly. Layers of fur snowshoes of bent willow sleds creaking under provisions. Their faces are uncovered cheeks, flushed but calm. No one hurries. There's confidence in every step, the kind that comes from treating the land not as an obstacle, but as a relative. The ground crunches beneath your boots, and you realize you're standing on something much older than fear knowledge worn smooth by use. Up ahead, the leader lifts a hand pointing toward a grove of cottonwoods half buried in snow. That's the next camp. The trees will break the wind, the frozen river will give water when cracked, and the earth below holds enough dry grass for fire starting. It's not luxury, it's foresight. By dusk, new teepees rise like pale moons against the blue horizon. Fires flicker again. Children laugh as they stomp paths in the snow, flattening the ground for bedding. You feel the rhythm returning, the comfort of rebuilding what you took down only hours before. There's no complaint, no fatigue. Movement isn't inconvenience. It's maintenance of balance. In the northern forests, Cree and Ojibwe bands carried similar patterns. Their homes, conical lodges made of birch bark and hides, could be disassembled, carried, and raised within hours. To outsiders, it looked exhausting. To them, it was freedom. You didn't fight winter by hiding from it. You moved with it until it let you pass. Even their routes were mapped with precision. The Lakota followed frozen rivers that doubled as highways smooth and open for sleds. The Blackfoot moved along foothills, where Chinook whined. Those warm, sudden breezes from the Rockies could melt snow in a single afternoon. Every camp placement was a blend of geography and prayer. A decision that meant the difference between endurance and suffering. You paused to watch the firelight bloom in the new camp. The same smell of burning pine fills the air. The same laughter rolls through the dark. There's a strange beauty in this repetition, like a heartbeat echoing across miles of snow. You realize this isn't survival, it's fluency. They don't conquer winter, they speak its language. If you've ever moved apartments in the rain or struggled to pitch a tent in mild weather, this scene humbles you. Imagine doing it with frost, cracking your fingertips, and still finding time to sing. Because yes, they sang while working. It kept the rhythm steady, the spirit warm. Maybe that's the secret modern life forgets. Warmth isn't only about temperature. It's about morale. The heat that begins in the chest and spreads outward. Night deepens, and the sky turns into a sheet of stars, so thick it looks solid. The fires across the camp burn small and steady, each one a heartbeat against the cold. You pull your fur tighter, watching the silhouettes move with the patience of people who know now no season lasts forever. The world around you may freeze, but motion, that quiet, confident motion, is warmth enough. Morning returns wrapped in white silence, but this time you notice the patterns. Each tribe, each region, each climate carried its own philosophy of warmth. What worked for the Lakota on the open plains wouldn't survive a Cree winter in the northern forests or the brutal Arctic nights faced by Inuit hunters. The genius of it all was variety. No single way to stay alive existed. There were dozens, each tuned like an instrument to its landscape. You start to see how geography sculpted invention. On the Great Plains, where the land stretched flat and wind ruled like a god, the teepee was the perfect answer, tall, circular, light, and ready to move. Its smoke hole breathed out the sky. Its hides flexed under storms like a muscle. But farther north, among the Cree and Ojibwe forests, replaced the endless horizon. There, warmth meant bark and boughs lodges, framed with saplings and covered with birch bark, or hides insulated with moss and snow. These shelters smelled of pine resin and smoke earthy and constant, built not to move daily, but to endure months. Travel west to the Rockies and the Plateau, and things changed again. Tribes like the Salish and Nez Perce crafted mat lodges woven from tule reeds. These dried reeds trapped air like feathers, forming walls that breathed but never froze. In wetter climates that mattered more than anything, you didn't fear the cold as much as the damp. Heat from small fires dried the mats from within, creating microclimates so gentle that frost rarely formed inside. And then farther north still, the Arctic taught the hardest lessons of all. The Inuit didn't have forests for poles or herds for hides, so they turned to snow itself, the material everyone else avoided. With knives carved from bone, they sliced hard-packed drifts into perfect blocks, stacking them in a spiral until light bent softly through the walls. The igloo wasn't just clever, it was revelation. Inside, body heat and a single oil lamp lifted the temperature above freezing while the snow outside stayed 40 degrees. The material that killed you could also save you if you knew how to listen to it. You wonder if modern people could ever be that observant. We build walls with the arrogance of permanence. They built theirs with humility, understanding the land's moods better than their own reflections. Warmth wasn't about conquering cold. It was about making peace with it. Even clothing echoed that truth. The Inuit stitched caribou fur inward, for insulation outward, for weatherproofing, a reversible jacket designed centuries before zippers. The Cree lined moccasins with rabbit fur and wrapped legs in deerhide strips to keep snow from biting the ankles. The Lakota wore layered robes belted at the waist, so heat trapped inside the folds. Each adaptation was an agreement between need and respect. And then there were the fires. The plain's open tippies breathed freely. Arctic lamps burned seal oil under domes of snow. Forest lodges used tightly vented chimneys of bark. Fire wasn't universal. It was contextual. That's what made survival so elegant here. It wasn't one solution repeated. It was hundreds of solutions whispered by place and season. You sit by a fresh fire now, sparks leaping into the cold air, and it hits you how the word primitive has always missed the point. Nothing about this life was primitive. It was experimental, refined, and endlessly creative. Every decision how to angle a pole, where to stack snow, which fur to wear first, was the result of centuries of observation. If civilization is about mastering your environment, then these people were already professors of physics and design. The sound of laughter drifts across the camp. A child plays in the snow, shaping small blocks and stacking them like the adults. Their gloves are too big, their balance unsteady, but the intention is perfect practice memory inheritance. You realize that's how knowledge survived here, not through books or blueprints, but through repetition, so gentle it felt like play. The wind changes direction again, brushing your face with air, sharp enough to sting. Somewhere deep inside, you feel gratitude for fires that never went out for hides, that didn't fail for people who learned to live kindly with the hardest thing in the world. You watch the smoke spiral upward, joining the clouds, and wonder if maybe warmth was never just about temperature. Maybe it was about awareness, to know the land well enough to survive it. That's the kind of intelligence we're still trying to relearn. You wake before dawn, and the world outside the teepee glows blue. The kind of blue that only exists before sunrise on snow. Everything is still. You hear the faint groan of ice in the river, the soft click of cooling wood, and then silence so deep it hums. Here's your hook, and it comes wrapped in frost. The miracle isn't that they survived the cold, it's that they made peace with it. You step outside, pulling the fur tight around your shoulders. The cold bites sharp and clean, but there's no panic in it. The camp sleeps in perfect order, each teepee breathing small clouds into the dawn. The smell of smoke lingers pine fat ash. For a moment, it feels as if the earth itself is holding its breath. You turn to look back at your own lodge, its top still trailing a thin line of smoke. The hide walls glow faintly from the ember inside. And you realize this isn't just a structure, it's a memory. Every stitch, every pole, every stone remembers human hands. And those hands belong to people who never saw winter as an enemy. They saw it as a teacher. They didn't survive because they fought harder. They survived because they listened better. To the wind's direction, to the crunch of snow underfoot, to the way smoke twisted in certain weather. To them, warmth wasn't a possession. It was a relationship. Every layer of fur, every ember, every shared breath inside the teepee was part of a conversation with the world around them. You walk slowly between the lodges, watching the first figures stir. Someone yawns, another stretches, a child's laugh cuts through the air like sunlight. The rhythm of life returns. The fire will be fed. The snow brushed away the hides, adjusted to greet another day. There's no drama in it, no triumph. Just calm mastery. The thought lingers that maybe modern comfort has made us colder. We turn knobs, press buttons, and call that control. But we've forgotten what it means to feel truly warm. Here, warmth wasn't measured in degrees. It was measured in connection. Every spark of fire came from effort. Every layer of hide came from gratitude. Every night's sleep came from trust in one another, in the fire, in the wisdom of ancestors who learned patience from the snow. You glance toward the horizon. The sun edges over the plains, setting the snow on fire with gold. The light catches the frozen smoke trails, and for a moment it looks like the world is exhaling warmth back into the sky. You breathe in deeply, the air freezing your lungs, but you smile. Because somehow it feels good to feel everything. The sting, the chill, the quiet proof of life. In that silence, you remember all the nights that came before the fire, that never slept, the hides, that whispered the stories, that hummed warmth into dreams. You think of all the generations that lay under the same stars, wrapped in fur and courage. And suddenly you understand the secret wasn't just their skill. It was their humility. They didn't bend nature. They bowed to it. The cold sharpens again, but it doesn't scare you anymore. You can almost feel the heartbeat of the land beneath your feet, steady and slow. Somewhere deep inside, you know this warmth is still alive, not in fires or hides, but in memory itself. So you step back into the teepee one last time. The embers glow quiet and alive. You lie down, pulling the buffalo robe to your chin, and close your eyes. The world fades into a soft hum of wind, the rhythm of breath, the sigh of fire. And as you drift toward sleep, one final thought warms you, better than any flame. They didn't just survive winter, they mastered it, turned it into a cradle, and taught it to sing. So as the last ember fades, and the teepee sighs into silence, your mind drifts toward the next question: if they could sleep through blizzards without freezing. How did they eat? No pots, no stoves, no steel knives, just fire, stone, bone, and patience. Let's step closer to the hearth and taste how survival once smelled. Snap awake, hunger is already pacing the camp like a wolf, and breakfast for you is not a plate. It's a search pattern traced across earth, water, and wind. Cold air smells of wet leaves and stone. Your pantry is a creek bend, a grove of trees, a patch of meadow where last summer's stems still remember the sun. No plastic, no pantry door, no timer dinging from a kitchen. If you want to eat, you have to notice. You begin with a language of plants, which is really a language of textures and tiny warnings. This isn't a relaxed browse. It's a quiz with consequences. Bitter often means safe but stubborn, while an overly glossy shine can whisper no. You slide a thumb under the inner bark, the cambium of a wind-felled pine, pale and moist, like a thin ribbon. Peeled and chewed, it tastes shyly sweet, a remembered famine snack in more than one woodland tradition when storage runs low. If you've ever gnawed the pale rib of cabbage, you already understand the vibe. Water is your next teacher. Kneel at the creek. Gravel chills your knees, and the world narrows to the chuckle of current. Flip a stone and caddisfly cases cling like tiny armored tubes fish. Fish adore them, so you mentally mark where trout idle in shadow for another hour. When cooking's an option, for now, water gives greens. You pinch watercress, where the flow is fast and cold enough to sting your wrists. It's peppery clean and more honest than coffee. You sip carefully from cupped hands, feeling cold climb your arms. On drier ground, you search the edges because edges are generous. Miners' lettuce beds into a shady swale. Lamb's quarters and amaranth volunteer where last year's ash added bite to the soil. You pinch sniff brush, a leaf against your lip, to test for burn. A bitter taste from a known safe plant isn't a deal breaker. It's a puzzle. Some bitterness signals nutrients, and some reminds you that pounding, leaching, or heat will turn the mouth's frown into a nod. Handfuls disappear into a woven pouch whose strap warms a diagonal line across your shoulder. Berries change the tempo. Service berries carry a quiet sweetness like early summer kept in a pocket. Chokecherries are more complicated raw. They pack tannin and a warning to treat pits with respect. Later, when you pound and dry fruit into cakes, flavor blooms and storage becomes easy. Today, you mostly take notes with your feet tracing where shrubs thrive, learning the neighborhood of shade slope and bird traffic. Food is a calendar before it's a plate, and you are turning pages by walking. Roots humble you most. You kneel in a meadow flecked with bulbs. Blue commas will keep its promise in flowers months from now. Death commas keeps a cruel joke always. Elders teach the rule that saves lives. Learn the leaves the place and the season don't guess. Some roots are gifts only after long, patient cooking that changes their chemistry. Without that, you mark the spot in your mind and move on. Hunger argues for shortcuts. Wisdom wins by refusing them. Nuts are heavy hitters that still make you work. Acorns thud like ideas from the canopy, sleek and convincing. Crack one with a stone, the meat is pale and dense, but your tongue meets a stern lecture on tannins. You could chew and regret it, or remember the stream in the future day. You'll leach bitterness until the nut becomes bread porridge or thickened stew. Today is a scouting shift, mapping oaks, testing a few, pocketing what squirrels missed, and promising your stomach that patience pays with flavor. Animals rarely announce themselves, but their traces do. A line of disturbed needles, a split hoof print, a tuft of fur on bark. Every sign is an arrow. You aren't hunting yet. You're reading. If you share ground with deer, elk, rabbit, or turkey, you also share their plants. Where they feed you may find tubers loosened by hooves or shoots too tender to defend themselves. Survival here isn't a duel with nature. It's drafting behind the windbreak of other eaters and moving inside the larger rhythm. If you walk the margin where water meets world, generosity changes flavor. At a rock-framed coast, low tide becomes a classroom. You listen for the sigh under kelp mats, the clack of shells as a wave pulls back. Mussels and some clams keep pride, and in a pinch eaten raw, though caution is always part of the meal. Elders teach which seasons are safe and which blooms of unseen life can sicken the unwary. Kelp itself is food and rope and wrapper, rinsed in cold water. A strip snaps between your teeth like salty celery. Storage is the quiet hero. You never just find food. You stage it for the you who will be hungrier later. Bundle greens and coil stems, tie them with bark fiber. Cache roots at the edge of shade where soil stays cool. Line a shallow pit with leaves to keep gathered bulbs from warming. Tuck berries into a birch bark cone so their skins don't bruise. The pouch on your hip carries more than calories. It holds the shape of your next few days and turns chance into a plan. And yes, your mind drifts to modern life the way a hand wanders toward a pocket that isn't there. A supermarket aisle is a promise made with fluorescent light. This meadow is a promise written in sap and bird song. Which seems more reliable to you right now? That may depend on whether trucks arrive on time or the salmon do. Different logistics, same human heartbeat. Quick question for the sleepy campfire chat later. If the grid blinked off for a week, which 3 foods around your home could you actually find without a phone? You chew a ribbon of cambium and tilt your face toward the pale sun. Hunger is still a drum, but it beats softer. You've mapped water greens, nuts, roots, berries, and if the tide cooperates, shellfish. You've mapped yourself too, what you notice, what you skip, what you eat, what you promise to return to with patience, and yes, with heat. The next skill is the hinge of everything, coaxing a spark to live in your hands and feeding it until it can teach stubborn plants and tough meats to be kinder. You kneel where last night's frost still freckles the soil, and gather what a flame likes to eat before it has teeth. Feather fine fibers and dry shreds that act like gossip for sparks. Your fingers tease a bird's nest bundle from cedar bark, cattail fluff, milkweed down, and a little punk wood rubbed into dust. If you're farther north, you might add a crumb of chaga, black and woody, like stale bread, because certain fungi hold heat the way a good rumor lingers. This is your tinder, and it's fussy. It wants air, it wants patience, and it wants you to stop thinking about dinner for 5 minutes. Stone and spark come first in your mind, because you've seen the trick hard flint or chert meets iron pyrite, and a brief constellation flies down into the nest. Later, after strangers arrive, steel replaces pyrite and the spark becomes easier. But right now, you're still in the era of stone and breath. You hunch close, cup the bundle, and your cheeks feel the cold authority of morning. Tap, tap, tap. A faint glow finds a home. Smoke threads up like a line drawn by a shy pencil. But most days your teacher is wood on wood. The hand drill is simplest and most honest, spindle hearth board, your hands and your focus. You pick a dry stalk yucca if you're in the southwest mullein, or sagebrush in other dry lands, willow or cottonwood where water hums nearby. The hearthboard is softer than the spindle cedar or cottonwood working well. You carve a small depression with a flake of stone, nick a notch for the cold to escape, then seat the spindle upright. Your palms ride the shaft, sliding down in rhythm, then jumping back to the top, down and back, building heat the way a song builds belief. If you've made friends with sinew, rawhide, or plant cordage, the bow drill turns friction into a machine. A curved stick becomes the bow. The cord loops the spindle so it spins with each stroke. Your upper hand rests on a socket, maybe antler, maybe a stone with a cup pecked into it, lubed with a smear of fat or resin so it doesn't join the party. Stroke steady, not frantic. The first wisps are so faint you almost distrust your eyes. Then the notch fills with brown dust, and a darker bead begins to smolder. You tip the board, and the tiny coal lands in your tinder like a baby bird tumbling into a nest. Breath is the secret ingredient that never runs out. You lift the nest and hold it so smoke flows past your face. Your inhale smells like hot paper and dry meadow. You blow very gently, cheeks rounded like you're trying not to wake someone sleeping. The ember brightens the fibers, blacken and curl, and suddenly the nest sighs into flame. You set it down with both reverence and relief. Slide on thin twigs you lined up earlier in a teepee shape, then slightly thicker sticks, then wrist-thick fuel. The flame climbs a ladder you built on purpose. You don't just have fire now. You have a workshop, a pharmacy, a night watch, and a kitchen. The first practical move is to think forward. You make charred, punk, half-burned, crumbly wood that catches the next spark in one try. You choose a place where flame won't bite roots or race up grass. You ring it with stones if you have them, with packed earth if you don't. If wind is playful, you build a windbreak of logs, leaving a low mouth so air can slide in. Many nights you lay a long fire parallel to your sleeping spot, one log fire for you, one for the cold, and let radiant heat be your blanket. Smoke is flavor, but it's also shield and signal. At a summer camp near water, a smudge fire, a smoky slow burn with green leaves, keeps biting insects doubting their choices. Over a rack of fish, smoke becomes thyme made edible. Cedar and alder add sweetness on the coast. Cottonwood keeps steady. Inland mesquite sings farther south. Because you can't always cook right now, you learn what your granduncle taught with a shrug: make the fire work all day, even if you don't. That means coals banked under ash. A pocket coal carried in a bark tube with dry moss for the walk. or a slow coal asleep in a lump of fungus, so you don't start from zero when rain sulks on the horizon. Ritual curls into all of this, the way smoke curls under a pothook. You don't shout at a flame, you persuade it. Some mornings you whisper thanks when the coal takes. Some feasts begin with a pinch of meal corn in farming homelands, or a shred of dried meat elsewhere flicked into the fire so ancestors eat first. The physics is the same anywhere. Heat, fuel, air, but your posture your patience, and your manners keep the camp from becoming a lesson in what not to do. Fire can be teacher and temper alike. It can boil your stew and your temper if you forget humility. What wood that depends on your map? Cottonwood and willow deadfall are dependable where creeks gossip year-round. In high desert you harvest cola skeletons and juniper, or you slow-burn pinyon that smells like memory. On the plains, dried bison chips turn the idea of firewood on its head. They burn hotter than the jokes people make about them. In wet forests, cedar bark, your lifesaver fibers, shredded down to hair, unlock flame. Even when the world drips and rotten punkwood dried near the body, heat of your chest pays back every careful minute. Cooking starts the second your confidence rises with the heat shimmer. Skewers of willow green so they don't char through hold fish open like smiling envelopes. A stick propped over coals roasts marrow bones until the fat glistens and the smell makes conversation pause. A flat stone near the edge of coals becomes a griddle for seed cakes, a sizzle pad for thin slices of meat, a place where acorn mush once leached in the creek firms into something your hands can carry. You learn that coals are kinder than flame when taste matters, and that patience is a spice nobody measures. Your camp mind turns to contingency because weather loves surprises. Rain split a dead log lengthwise and make a guttering roof above a tight coal bed. Let the log itself feed the coals from the underside. Wind build a Dakota-style fire twin holes connected by a tunnel, so air drafts from the lee side and the flame crouches below ground. Need to travel rake coals and bury the heart of the fire under an inch of ash. When you return hours later, it wakes with a single breath like a friend pretending they weren't napping. Interactive moment for the sleepy crowd if your kitchen lost power tonight. Could you make a fire without matches? Which 3 tinders around your home would you grab? Dryer lint, shredded birch bark, a crumbling 2x4's punk before the house goes dark. Not a dare, just a whisper of readiness. And here's the quiet miracle once fire answers you. Everything else says yes more easily. Stone softens to flake. Sinew dries into cord that doesn't argue. Clay stops being mud and starts being memory in a shape that holds water. As the first pot forms in your hands, wet earth coaxed smooth on a lapboard by fire-warmed fingers. You feel the kitchen rise around you from materials that were only moments ago just creek bank hillside and fallen tree. In other words, the flame you coaxed this morning is already teaching you how to shape clay, sharpen stone, and polish bone into tools that will change the way your next meal tastes. Your hands learn that kitchen is a verb. Clay isn't a store-bought pot. It's a wet promise hiding in a cut bank where the creek chews the shore and leaves a slick gray tongue. You scoop it in thumb-sized lumps because big ambitions crack when they dry. Grass seeds and sand crunch between your fingers. Accidental temper, and that gives you a thought. You crumble dry grass, crush old potsherd into powder if you have any, or stir in ground shell near the coast. Temper stops a pot from shrinking itself into heartbreak. You need until the clay stops sticking and starts listening. Form follows your lap. Roll coils as even as a flute maker's breath, snake them into spirals, and pinch the seams smooth with the tenderness you used to blow on tinder. The rim flares, a little, not a flourish, just a way to catch a hanging hook later. You slide a thumb along the inside to round the shoulder. The curve will help heat circulate when soup makes its first whirl. A paddle, a flat piece of wood taps, 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 while a smooth river stone inside supports the wall. The sound changes, the thickness evens, like a drum whose skin is being tuned. If someone says that's good enough, the paddle answers one more pass. Sun and wind are your first kilns. Pots sit under airy shade so the outside dries gently, while the inside lets go of water without sulking into cracks. You touch the surface, the coolness is a clock. When it feels just a little cooler than your skin, you move to the next step, open fire hardening. You don't throw it in. You nestle the pot among coals, add new fuel around the outside so the heat climbs like dawn, not like noon. In the Southwest, some folks burn with cow chips or old brush to get a steady, long heat. In the eastern woodlands, bark and twig piles make a snug oven. The pot blushes where flames kiss. Black, red, or buff becomes a story about how oxygen did or didn't get invited. Later, true kilns will come to some places, but for now the learning is in the listening cracks, complain audibly before they become visible. Stone is older than gossip, and it teaches you to eat with steady angles. You find a boulder face that fractures conchoidally flint-chert obsidian if you're blessed by volcanoes, fine-grained quartzite if you're practical and you strike with a hammerstone. Flakes leap off with clever edges. One becomes a knife to fillet trout. Another becomes a grater that will rasp roasted tubers into a mash. You set a larger slab on stable ground. That's your metate, your everyday counter. A handstone mano fits your palm like it was waiting for you. Seeds, acorns, and dried meat surrender beneath its slow circles. The first time you grind maize dry, you cough at the fragrant dust. The 100th time, your muscles have learned a rhythm that lets your mind wander toward song. Bone is the quiet co-worker who never leaves. You split long bones with a precise crack and peel away slivers that become awls, needles, and very quickly spoons. The spoon bowl carves out from dense leg bone, smoothed with sandstone until your lips can't find a snag. Ribs become spatulas. You think back to the marrow you roasted over coals. The same animal now hands you utensils to serve the next meal. Tendons dry into sinew that shrinks into tight, durable lashing for a pot hanger. Hoof and horn give you glue when boiled to a sticky reduction. Nothing wasted isn't a motto. It's the difference between eating and wishing. Your camp grows racks and rigging. 3 green sticks become a pot tripod. A notched crossbar lets you adjust height so stew simmers rather than throws a tantrum. A U-shaped pot hook carved from willow holds steady. Soaked first, it won't burn through right away. You lay a flat stone on smaller rocks near the coal bed. Suddenly you own a griddle. On it, thin cakes of pounded seeds and berries bubble slightly, edges drying to a flexible chew. Portable calories for a walk that doesn't forgive detours. Taste responds to texture as much as heat. You crack acorns, leach them in baskets submerged in running water, then grind them with the mano while a pot nearby breathes steam. You stir in a bone spoon and feel the grit fade from the paste, the sign that tannins have gone downstream. Seeds, amaranth, goosefoot, wild sunflower, toast in a shell or a shallow pottery dish lined with clean sand. You swirl and flick away the sand later, watching tiny kernels pop like whispers. If you're coastal, a shell heap near camp isn't trash. It's a library of meals read and remembered, a place to pull a sturdy oyster shell when your clay spoon needs a day off. And then there's the mortar and pestle, heavy as a promise. A boulder cup holds juniper berries you crush for flavor, or roasted piñon you pound into a paste that calms a busy stomach. The pestle's handle burnishes where your hand lives. The base polishes where seeds surrender. You test a handful of parched corn in the mortar. 3 dozen taps later, the smell is halfway to popcorn, the texture halfway to flour. You sift through a woven tray, toss the coarse back and keep the fine for tomorrow's porridge. This is cuisine repetition that creates nuance. You also learn to build containers you can trust. Birch bark folds sew into canisters with spruce root stitches, water-resistant, light, and suspiciously modern-looking. On the plains, where birch scarce rawhide, par flesh, stiff-painted laced, becomes your pantry on the move. In the southeast, woven river cane baskets hold everything from mussels to hominy. And when lined with clay slip, they cheat their way into being watertight enough for hot rock boiling. If you've ever grabbed a reusable silicone bag and felt clever, imagine doing the same with bark and fiber and zero waste. A quick interactive check for the midnight audience: if you had to cook tonight with no metal, which 3 items would you grab from nature's aisle? Flat stone hardwood stick, and a clay flower pot you could invert over coals. Could you improvise a pot hook from a coat hanger and a green branch? Not survivalist cosplay, just a thought exercise that makes old techniques feel less museum glass and more backyard feasible. The people around you give names to these skills because names make memory sticky. Among ancestral Puebloan towns, clay forms that once sat in open fires now come to you as sherds in arroyo, bends painted with mineral slips that still hold a moonlight sheen. In Haudenosaunee, long houses, wooden ladles carved from maple pass corn soup down a row as steadily as a heartbeat. Along the northwest coast, carved horn spoons gleam at feasts where steaming baskets lift lids like stage curtains. The tools differ because the homelands differ. The logic is constant: shape what the land offers until it shapes you back. Night folds in and your little workshop glows. The new pot gives off a faint hiss, steam sneaking out through microscopic paths you labored to align. A bone spoon rests on a flat stone, ready for the first taste test, the way a modern cook hovers over a simmering sauce. Around you, stone, clay, and bone have turned from found objects into a kitchen that remembers your hands, and the food you're about to coax from them will taste like patience set to a low flame. Bury dinner. Feed the ground, and it feeds you back, slow, smoky, and patient as a lullaby. You don't flip a steak, you tuck a secret. Your hands shape a shallow pit in the sandy margin above the tide line, or in a patch of prairie where soil gives like cake. The hole isn't big, it's honest. You're building a one-use oven that no one has to wash, and the thermostat is a language of stone, steam, and smell. You start with rocks that won't turn your supper into shrapnel. Dense, dry stones, granite, basalt, old river cobbles that have lived a while stack into a firebed. You avoid flaky, damp, or layered stones that pop when steam gets bossy. A fire climbs around the stack, eating driftwood, piñon, cottonwood, whatever your map offers. While flames school the rocks, you gather the green that makes steam seaweed if you're coastal, damp grass. And leafy boughs inland, agave leaves or sotol in the desert. The green is not garnish, it's your moisture and your buffer, the difference between roasted and ruined. When the stones glow and hiss, you rake out the unburned wood and leave a floor of heat that hums under your shins. A thick layer of wet seaweed slaps down with a sweet iodine perfume. Inland, you lay down soaked cattail mats. Skunk cabbage, non-toxic when used as a liner. Not food or bundles of willow and maple leaves. The green layer is a promise to your food, no scorching, steady steam. You nestle fish, whole-scaled bellies stuffed with herbs, if you have them alongside venison, wrapped in leaf packets. Shellfish mound in their own corner like a basket of coins. Corn in husks, tucks in kernels, snug in their natural wrappers. You add another blanket of green on top, then a roof of bark or damp mats, then push warm sand or soil over the whole mound. The oven looks like a modest grave. It is, in a way, the burial of rawness. Time shifts to smell and sound. You press an ear to the damp earth and listen to soft, fizz-stone heat, speaking steam. Somewhere under there, salts bloom and sugars relax. If you're on a New England shore with wampanoag neighbors, the seaweed is rockweed or eelgrass, and when a breeze crosses the mound, it carries brine and butter notes, long before anyone invented butter here. The famous clam bake isn't a festival word to you. It's just dinner seasoned by tide and tradition. On the Pacific coast, you might add alder branches for a hint of sweet smoke halibut and salmon tucked in like sleeping paddlers. Inland prairie and woodland people work the same physics with different groceries. A shoulder of deer rubbed with crushed juniper and a pinch of wild onion rests in a packet of green leaves tied with bark cordage. A rabbit wrapped in cattail leaves sits beside tubers. Indian potato, wapato, prairie turnip, each one pricked so steam can get inside without bursting the skin. The pile becomes a field note in flavor. Your land writes its own recipe as you stack it. Dessert ovens look like a dare, but they're gentle once you learn their grammar. You line a deeper pit with hot stones and thick agave leaves that look like green spears. The hearts, the pinas, go in whole, armored by their own leaves. You roof the pit seal with earth and let the heat do its math for a day or two. When you open it, the agave heart pulls apart in fibers that shine with syrup, smoky and sweet, a caramel you can tear with fingers. The same trick softens sotol and yucca, flipping tough inulin-rich plants into dessert without a spoon. People later call this mezcal, but you don't need a label to grin. The patience is the point. You can't rush a buried oven. So you tidy camp, mend a strap twist, more cordage, check your pot near the main fire. You visit the mound with your nose. The smell deepens from green and hot to savory and inevitable. If you're unsure, you carefully lift a corner to peek. Steam kisses your face like a polite sauna, and you learn whether the fish eyes have turned pearly and the shells have yawned. Then you seal it back like closing a book mid-chapter, so the ending can write itself. Pulling food from an earth oven gives you that rare feeling you did something complicated and it looks simple. The top layer peels back with a wet sigh. Shells rattle and flash open. Fish skins slip like satin, revealing flakes that separate with the brush of a bone spoon. Venison smells clean and mineral, not heavy. Corn husks hide a yellow that only steam can coax each kernel plumped and ready. You eat with your fingers because the steam has already washed the fuss off the evening. Nothing goes to waste, not even the lesson. The hot stones cool slowly. You can ring them around a small night fire or shift a few into a shallow trench to warm the sleeping side of your bedding. Seaweed becomes a garden amendment for coastal plots. Inland greens dry in fuel or padding. Bones go to the broth pot. Shells when you're by the sea. Become lime later if you dare that experiment, or simply stack into a midden that future kids will read like a family diary. Tiny tricks accumulate into confidence. You mark the depth that gave you perfect fish, 2 fingers of sand in a wind 3 when the air is still. You learn that venison likes to be insulated, fish likes to be close to steam, shellfish likes heat, but smiles under more seaweed. You start to season with what the land already offers. Spruce tips in spring for a citrus twang, wild garlic in summer. Sagebrush smoke so faint you only taste it when you breathe out. You even play with timing, put roots in early fish late so they finish together, and no one waits with a full plate and an empty hand. Modern aside for the kitchen brain, your slow cooker and your sous vide rig are just polite cousins of this mound. Both rely on controlled heat and moisture. Both brag about low and slow. One beeps, one breathes. If you've got a backyard and a willingness to get your hands sandy, you can practice on a small scale, one fish. A dozen clams, a few husked corn using a fire ring and a shovel. Safety note: the elders would insist on pick dry, solid stones, keep water handy, and leave the site as clean as a tide-washed rock. People weave story into these meals because the ground feels like company. Along the northwest coast, potlatch feasts once lifted earth oven lids, like stage curtains, steam rising as if ancestors were exhaling. In the northeast, the knowledge that outsiders later called a clambake traveled through Wampanoag and Narragansett hands long before anyone printed an invitation. On the plains pits, steamed bison hump and roots, for a crowd smoke drifting like a second horizon above grass. The ingredients change, the feeling doesn't. You cover food with care, and the land agrees to finish the cooking. You lean on your heels and eat with grateful silence, steam clouding the cool air. Fingertips glistening with fish oils and sweet plant juices. The oven still breathes softly behind you, a warm belly under a blanket of sand humming to itself like a contented drum. Steam takes over where buried heat left off, and you learn the neatest trick in an old-world kitchen: make water boil in a container that can't touch fire. You stare at a bark bowl the way a modern cook stares at a glass dish they're scared to broil, then you remember what you already know. Rocks hold the sun once you lend them flame. You pick stones as carefully as you picked seaweed. Dense, non-layered, dry. River cobbles that have told you the truth before. Basalt if you live under old lava. Granite that shrugs at heat. You stack them in the coals until their surfaces bloom dull red and the edges whisper. A green stick becomes your tongs. A forked limb and a loop of wet bark help too. The bowl birch bark, folded and sewn with spruce root if you're in the north. A coiled basket from willow or river cane in the east or southeast. A rawhide bag on the plains waits a safe distance from the blaze, already half full of water and hope. The first hot stone hisses a warning, then behaves. Lower gently, it sits on the bottom and exhales a chain of bubbles. You add another and another, stepping back between each so steam doesn't cuff your face. Soon the surface shivers like a pond in a polite wind. You stir with a paddle, a stick smoothed by many meals, and the bowl does not burn, because it's the water that carries the heat, not dry flame. In a wooden trough, same magic heated rocks do the work, and wood stays patient. In a rawhide bag, edges damp and floppy water boils, while the bag simply looks scandalized. Soup arrives from the edge of the camp, like a guest who knows the way. Fish chunks first, they forgive overcooking. A trout goes in with its head and tail if you want a broth that tastes like the river that fed you. Spruce tips in spring add a lemon note. Wild onion and a handful of watercress make the pot smell like someone just cleaned a forest. On the coast, mussels slide in and return to the conversation by opening. Inland parched corn, nixtamalized later in history for many farming nations. But right now you may be at the plain parched corn stage, plumps and softens in the roll of stones and water. You skim with a carved wooden ladle. Foam collects at the rim like gossip you're tired of hearing. Baskets become honest-to-goodness kettles with this method. Among peoples of the northwest coast, tight spruce root baskets are so close woven they hold water like a dare. Your job is to keep swapping rocks fast enough to keep a boil. In the Great Basin and Plateau, coiled willow baskets do the same under a drift of steam that smells like sage after rain. In the eastern woodlands, river cane baskets thickened with clay slip can even simmer without stones if the coals are gentle and you keep watch, but hot rock boiling makes life safer and faster. Each region invents a vessel from what it has, and stones become the universal stove. Soapstone bowls, steedite soft and carvable, are the cheat code where quarries bless you. You carve a thick-walled pot with a rim that can handle a carrying stick. It sits near flame without drama, so you simmer longer without the rock dance. Inuit and other Arctic peoples turn this to high art stewing sea mammal and fish in stone that barely blinks at heat. Down the continent where steatite outcrops exist, you'll see old bowls blackened like seasoned cast iron. Your wooden spoon finds the same tiny simmer sounds you hear in clay, and your nose learns to read the exact second not done pivots to serve now. You add starch the way a conductor adds horns at the right moment with purpose. Handfuls of ground seeds ride the simmer to thicken broth into a meal that hugs the ribs. Acorn mush, already leached, slides in silkily, turning the liquid tan and soothing. Roasted cracked nuts, piñon, hazelnut, hickory, scatter richness across the surface as they sink. On nights when you're planning tomorrow's strength, you let the pot roll a little longer until bone gives up its mineral sweetness and the broth grows satin. A splash over yesterday's roasted tubers turns leftovers into generosity. You learn to manage the stones like a short-order cook manages pans. Keep some heating, some working, some cooling on the side. When one cools in the pot, you fish it out with a looped branch, drop it near the fire, and slide in a fresh recruit. Stones that have served many meals become smooth and loyal. Stones with hidden cracks retire early, preferably not by exploding. You read their faces the way a carpenter reads wood grain. There's chemistry tucked in this steam. Later, when people around you plant corn in careful mounds, and you live in longhouses or towns, a different boiling joins the repertoire hominy made with wood ash lye. Wood ash stirred into water makes a gentle alkaline bath that loosens hulls and unlocks nutrients in maize. You boil shelled dry corn in that ash water until skins slip, then rinse and rinse, until the bitterness is gone, Saunir. That's hominy, toothsome, fragrant, the backbone of soups that steam up a winter morning. Tonight, even before that innovation, you sense the pattern fire and water. Plus a trick equals more from the same grain. Fat renders in this setup without burning, which is a small miracle. A pouch hung near heat with water and scraps of fatty meat turns into a slow sauna. Hot stones traded in and out coax liquid fat to rise. You skim and save it for later grease, for a wooden spoon, shine for a bowstring richness, for a lean stew. When people talk about without modern tools, smile at the elegance you're practicing physics with sticks, rocks, and patience. An interactive nudge for the midnight couch crew. Could you boil water tonight without a metal pot? Big ceramic planter saucer, clean wooden trough, heavy-duty paper cup, yes. It works if the water's inside and the flame kisses only the wet part and a few smooth rocks from the grill. Could you get a rolling boil? If you try it someday, do it outdoors. Stay safe and notice how fast you start thinking like your great-great-grand teachers. Names and places give this practice faces. Haida and Tlingit basket boiling keeps salmon feasts humming while cedar smoke writes the punctuation. In ancestral Puebloan country, a shallow stone-lined basin bubbles acorn mush as surely as any modern saucepan would. Haudnosani cooks in seasons when stone or clay is friendlier than bark. Stir corn soup with long-handled ladles, rhythm steady enough to become a song. On the plains, a raw hide-lined pit becomes a kettle for bone broth when wood is scarce, and you won't risk burning precious containers. By now, the steam has softened everything in arm's reach, including your shoulders. You sip from a horn spoon or tilt the bowl to your lips. The taste is more than fish, more than greens. It's the honest flavor of hot water and clean stones giving up their stored heat. So you can end the day with warmth, moving from inside out. You breathe, you chew, you nod, and the camp sounds soften, as if the pot has told the night a gentle secret. When the pot finally stops whispering, your feet remember that taste comes from place as much as from fire. So you shoulder your pouch and let the land change the menu. Wind combs the grass flat on the prairie, and you smell distance. Out here, meat moves in herds, and protein is a thunder you can hear before you see it. After a successful communal hunt, carefully planned honors shared, you stand at the edge of work that will feed many, not just you. Long bones rest near coals for marrow, the simplest luxury. Strips of bison lean sliced thin and long. You drape them on willow racks, smoke cottonwood and sage. Keeping flies shy and flavor honest. You grind a mix of dried berries, choke cherry, if you've been gathering well-pounded fat, and the smoked lean into a paste that firms into cakes. That's pemmican portable shelf-stable, and shockingly generous for its size, the trail ration that turns days of travel into something your legs can trust. Parfleche cases, rawhide painted and laced, become your pantry on the move, stiff envelopes of calories that ignore rain. Prairie plants give you their own language of fullness. You kneel with a digging stick at a prairie turnip timpsila, where a thin vine and a little swelling hint at treasure. Twist, lift, brush off a brown bulb as clean as a potato and roast it near coals until the skin scuffs and the inside sweetens. Sunflower heads dry in a lattice of sticks. Later you rub seeds free into a basket, parching and winnowing until a rhythmic whisper means enough. A stone mortar takes the seeds halfway to butter, and a little rendered fat completes the thought. Food here is windproof and hoofproof, designed by necessity to travel. Head south, and the air thins into desert clarity. Suddenly, flavor is architecture. You revisit the earth pit with different groceries and different patience. Agave hearts, piñas go in whole, layered with their own leaves, sealed for a day or two until fibers pull like sweet rope. Sotol and yucca follow the same gospel, bitter toughness baptized into honeyed chew by time and trapped steam. Mesquite beans rattle in their pods. You grind them into a flour that smells like summer and vanilla. Then stir it into hot water as pinally a drink as quick as it is comforting. Tapari beans, small and stubbornly drought-wise, simmer in clay. Their broth goes silky, and a pinch of wild oregano tips it toward herb garden. When saguaro fruit ripens, and the desert blushes at the rims of its crowns, you harvest with a long pole and cook down the crimson pulp into syrup. Pour a sheen of that syrup over mesquite cakes, and you have a dessert no bakery will ever list, because the recipe is a horizon. Climb into canyon country, where stone keeps shadows cool like vaults, and you hear dry corn narrate a different plot. Cobs hang from Vegas, hard good advice. Parched kernels crack under a mano, and the scent of toasted maize is so specific it erases a day's dust. Stir the coarse meal into water with a pinch of ash to make a gentle lye bath. Hulls slip, and tomorrow you'll call it hominy in soups that feed a long winter. Today you press a simple cake on a well-heated flat stone and watch it pucker and freckle. Eat it with roasted squash and a smear of pignon paste, and your tongue decides simple is a compliment. You don't need walls to have cuisine. You need memory and a good stone. Turn your boot to the coast, and the air changes instruments. Salt braids into everything. Cedar smoke is a constant you learn to feel as much as smell. You split a salmon long and careful, pin it open with skewers of green wood and set it near, not over the alder coals. Fat beads at the edges and runs down, threatening the fire if you crowd it. Move it, wait, breathe with the tide. A cedar plank version becomes theater. The board leans to reflect heat, and you baste with a brush of salal leaves dipped in a simple juice berry, or a hint of rendered eulachon grease if the season and river have been good. When it's time, the flesh lifts in big, obedient flakes, and the skin, if you've played your distance right, crisps just enough to be worth a smile you don't show anyone. Shellfish reset your sense of convenience. A low tide is a pantry door you don't open so much as walk down into. Razor clams tremble in the sand, and you learn the digger's sprint and plunge. Geoduck requires persuasion and a sense of humor the size of your shovel. Back at camp, mussels and clams steam under wet kelp, needing little more than heat and patience. Kelp itself slices into broth as a vegetable with manners. If you found sea urchin on a calm day, you crack and taste brine as sweet as rumor. Rockfish and halibut come with tricks, needle bones, and thick slabs respectively, each taught to you by hands that have turned those puzzles into celebrations for 1,000 summers. North, along colder coasts and rivers, another fat becomes a season's centerpiece. Eulachon uolichan run in silver crowds, and their gift is grease rendered in a long, careful process that smells like work and feasts afterward. That grease is a luxury, and a staple poured into carved spoons at potlatches brushed on dried fish, carrying calories across winters. It's not a condiment. It's a promise. You realize how every region stores sunshine differently. Berries in a pounded cake, fat in a jar, starch in a kernel, sweetness in a fiber, and how your body learns to recognize each jar and bag and basket as a particular answer to cold. Swing inland again to lakes that breathe mist at dawn, and you hear rice heads knocking on canoe gunnels in soft percussion. Manuman wild rice ripens when the heads bend and the kernels come willingly at a gentle tap. You pole a canoe through beds. You care for 2 people working as one, knocking kernels into the hull, leaving plenty to fall and reseed to feed birds to keep the water generous. Back ashore, you parch the rice in a kettle or big basket with hot stones, then dance on it, footwork in clean moccasins to loosen the husks. Winnow in the breeze with a birch bark tray. The husks fly, the grains stay. Boiled, the kernels open like tiny books and taste like nutty quiet. Stir into stews or eat with berries and maple notes. And a morning that began in fog ends with something that tastes like clarity. Head toward longhouses in forested east, and corn soup becomes both meal and glue between conversations. Beans climb corn squash shades, roots. The bowl smells of the alliance as much as of the fire. Long-handled ladles pass the story down a row. Maple sugar granules tick in a wooden box and sometimes finish a berry dish the way a tiny bell finishes a song. Fish from big rivers roast on frames. Venison smokes in a corner loft, and every beam smells faintly of dinners past. Nothing is a single dish, everything is a braid. A quick nudge for your modern kitchen brain if you had to pick one flavor from each landscape to keep in your cupboard. Which would you choose? Pemmican's concentrated summer, desert syrup's smoky candy, cedar smoked salmon's serious warmth, wild rice's autumn hush. Pick 3 in your head, and you've accidentally built a menu with more geography than most restaurants manage. The day's map folds on itself as dusk comes in. You've walked from grasslands to red rock, to tide pools, to deep rivers, without leaving the same century, and every region handed you a technique that works without a single modern tool. You didn't borrow convenience. You borrowed attention, and place did the rest. writing recipes that fit your hands, the way your hands now fit the tools you made. Wake your hands. Alchemy is muscle memory. And tonight the spell begins with rhythm. Grind, hush, breathe, repeat. Every push of stone over grain is a bass drum for your village, and your shoulders keep time better than any metronome. The hook is simple. You don't make food, you turn landscape into song you can swallow. Maize answers first because it likes ceremony and a steady wrist. Dry kernels rattle into a metate as bright as a low moon, and your mano rides a slow oval track until the rattle mutters, then sighs, then gives up. A parching fire in the corner snaps like polite applause. Those kernels were kissed by heat before they met stone, so they surrender a roasted perfume that follows you around the room. You tilt the slab so coarse meal gathers. You sift on a flat woven tray, letting wind separate the heavy from the hopeful. Coarser bits go back for another chorus. The fine meal piles into a modest hill that promises cakes, dumplings, or a quick mush that quiets a day's noise. Grinding becomes choreography when there are 4 or 6 of you. Knees tucked backs, straight bodies angled in a ring like petals, hands moving in counterpoint. In Hopi and Tohono O'odham, houses' corn-grinding songs float up melodies that set pace and turn work into something the walls want to remember. You hum without noticing you've started. Stone polishes itself on your insistence, and your breath smooths out until you forget you're breathing. Berries bring color to the rhythm, and your hands turn into measuring cups calibrated by stain. Choke cherries get the tough love first dried, then pounded whole pits included until the tannin learns some manners and the mash leans toward almond and wine. You press the paste into thin cakes, lay them on racks in the high shade, where wind behaves and the sun writes preservation into the surface. Service berries go gentler. You mash them with the heel of a stone stir in a handful of parched seed meal, and press them into coin-thick discs that remember August and February. Blueberries, huckleberries, salmonberries, each one dries into a private vowel of sweetness tucked in birch bark canisters or rawhide bags, where mice can't hold staff meetings. Fruit leather wasn't invented by a dehydrator. It was discovered by anyone with a flat rock, a clean hand, and patience. You paint thin layers of mashed berry on a sun-warmed slab, or a peeled cedar board, rotate it like a clock face as shadows move, and peel off a sheet that folds into sugar maps. Later, when you're walking and need quiet energy, you tear a corner and the day forgives you. You don't call it snack. You call it smart. Seeds ask for finesse the way a cranky elder asks for a cushion. Amaranth, goosefoot, lamb's quarters, wild sunflower. Each one toasts in a shallow pottery dish that has been slicked with clean sand. The sand is a trick. It spreads heat and lets you swirl without everything leaping skyward. When the seeds pop or darken just enough, you pour them into a tray. Blow lightly and the sand winks away while the seeds stay put. Pound them into meal or stir a fist into hot water with a pinch of salt, and you've made comfort that doesn't pretend to be fancy. Sugar, when it arrives, feels like a holiday that doesn't need a calendar. In maple country, late winter sharpens sap. You set a V-cut into a sugar maple with a stone chisel or a carefully shaped bone press in a sumac or cedar spile, and let sap tick into a birch bark bucket. Over days, you swap buckets as they brim, then boil sap down in broad kettles of clay or stone. Or do it the snow cheap way, freeze the first night's collection, toss the ice, and keep the sweeter fraction for the fire. Boiling becomes a slow opera, steam rises. The house smells clean, and the sugar sand falls away. You stir as the last water leaves and granules form like frost you can eat. Cakes set in wooden molds, and suddenly, berries have a new best friend. Corn mush learns a new register, and winter gets a note that isn't gray. Salt sneaks in on a different road. On coasts, you pan seawater in shallow basins, lined with stone or spread it in sun-bright trays, slap twined from driftwood and clay. Wind and time do the boiling for free. Scrape crystals, store them dry, and a pinch unlocks flavors as if you just remembered a friend's name. Inland, a lucky person knows a brine spring. You carry water home and simmer it down, while stories stretch and knots loosen. Salt is small and portable, which makes it a king without a crown. Greens like to be invited to last-minute parties. Nettles handled with respect, and a quick blanch turn is silky soup thickened with a palmful of ground seeds. Wild onions, ramps, and spring garlic show up flamboyantly. You ribbon them into a pot, and the room smells like you meant to cook all day, even if you didn't. Sumac cones steep in cold water for a tart drink that tastes like lemons never learned where you live. Labrador tea leaves perfume a pot with resin and calm, and suddenly late light feels like good company. Fermentation comes quietly where climate and custom say yes. In some wet, cool corners, you learn to pack greens into buried containers lined with bark, weighted with clean stones, the mouth sealed with clay. Weeks later, acid gentles bitterness, and a winter bowl gets a memory of spring. On big rivers and northern coasts, fish ferments under careful watch, a different tradition with rules that are as strict as they are local. You respect those boundaries. Not every trick travels, and not every jar needs your curiosity. Storage is the exclamation point after your alchemy sentence. Cache pits lined with grass and barked lids of woven sticks sealed with earth, a scent barrier of wild mint or sage, tucked around the rim, and the pantry goes invisible. Up in trees, baskets hang from bare thwarting branches, lashed with braided sinew that shrinks tight in dry air. Parfleche cases stand like stubborn briefcases in the shade, and their painted faces tell you which bundle holds berry cakes, which holds pemmican, which holds something you promised not to nibble before frost. An interactive nudge for your own kitchen, which repetitive task done long enough becomes oddly soothing, grating nutmeg, whisking polenta, folding dumplings. Imagine that task multiplied by the importance of winter. Would you hum? Would you sing your pace into the bowl? That's the difference between prep and practice. Names keep you honest, so you whisper them as you work. Haudenosaunee cooks stir corn soup that tastes like the agreement in the Three Sisters. Anishinaabe families mark sugar moon with steam and laughter and a wooden paddle's steady scrape. Diné hands form blue corn dumplings that puff in broth like small, well-behaved clouds. On the plains, women press choke cherry patties that will later meet rendered fat and turn into road strength disguised as dessert. Along the coast, salal berry leather rolls into neat cords you tuck behind other flavors like a good harmony line. By the time your shoulders are warm and your palms shine with a sheen of meal and juice, you've turned day into shelf life without a single machine. The trick isn't equipment, it's tempo. You push stone, you sing a little, you taste for readiness, and the land answers very politely with food that behaves when months turn hard and nothing fresh knocks at the door. You come back from the hunt with more than meat. You come back with a plan that smells like wood smoke and relief. Animals are not ingredients out here. They are seasons on oaks, and the moment they're honored, the clock starts on what to do first, second, and 20th, so nothing is wasted. The camp shifts into choreography. Some hands lift, some hands cut, some hands carry coals to where fat can render low and careful. You roll a long bone toward the heat and set a flat stone nearby to catch drips. Marrow is the first prize and the easiest kindness to yourself after a hard day. When the bone warms just enough, you nudge out the satin center with a sliver of wood, and the taste clean mineral soft lands, like gratitude on your tongue. The fire tonight is chosen for flavor and behavior. On cedar-rich coasts, it's a low alder bed, capped with cedar that leaks fragrant smoke. Inland cottonwood coals glow steady, while a twist of sage adds a whisper you only notice when you breathe out. You set meat higher than impatient instincts want close to warmth. Not the tongues of flame, because tenderness is a handshake between heat and time. Racks rise out of green willow or spruce poles lashed with bark. A crossbar suspends a rib basket you wove by eye. The smell is steady and serious, not flashy, the kind of aroma that teaches people to sit down and pass bowls without being asked. Division of work follows tradition and terrain. On the plains, a successful buffalo run, or jump carefully organized with scouts' decoys and a landscape that funnels the herd, becomes a village kitchen in motion. While cutters work fast, others ferry haunches to smoke frames, and still others tend a stone-lined pit where hot rocks and water coax fat from trimmings without scorching anything precious. In the far north, sea mammal hunts mean a different layout, hides pegged to the ground in tidy circles, meat portioned with bone or slate blades designed for smooth controlled cuts, lamps fueled with rendered oil, giving a golden windless light to late work. Along the northwest coast, cedar smokehouses breathe for days. Fish and meat hung with space for smoke to pass and not sulk. Nothing wasted turns literal in your hands. Sinew taken from back straps or legs dries on a line that looks almost like music notation. Later, you split it into threads for sewing or fletching, twist heavier cords for bowstrings and lashings that won't stretch in damp weather. Stomachs become clean vessels good for hot stone boiling or for storing rendered fat. Hides scraped with stone or bone and then treated with the animal's own brains, and a long session of stretching and smoking turn into soft, weather-wise clothing and covers that shrug off rain. Hooves simmer into glue. Antlers become handles and wedges. Small bones shape into fishhooks, awls, and ladles. Smoke itself is treated like a tool. It cures it, flavors it, calms insects, and it speaks the language of storage. Fresh meat is feast and medicine at once. The first portions go to elders and children, to those who stayed and prepared, to the hands that made the hunt possible. You spear pieces on green sticks and angle them over a bed of coals so they hiss and bead. A liver slice handled with respect, cooked gentle, brings a clean richness. The heart treated simply tastes like the story of the day, without exaggeration. Seasoning is what the land has on hand: crushed juniper, a rub of wild onion, a brush of melted fat mixed with a pinch of salt from a sun-dried pond. Talk around the fire floats and settles not too loud. There's a sense the animal deserves quiet company while you eat. Preservation starts even before you're full. Thin strips never thick enough to stall find their place in the upper air of the smokehouse or on racks where clean wind works with low heat. Dried lean will later meet berries and fat to become travel cakes that ignore weather. But first comes the baseline jerky that snaps, not bends. Tongues that dry into savory boards. Organ pieces turned to chips you can grind into broth. In colder months, a snow cache or permafrost pit is a walk-in larder made by climate. In shoulder seasons, a creekside cache under cold running water buys a day or two of safety while the racks do their slow miracles. The rule that keeps reputations intact is simple: dry fast. Keep clean, smoke steady, store high, and label with your memory. Rendering fat becomes a scene of quiet mastery. You build a shallow pit line it with a rawhide bag or a bark trough. Add water and cut fat, then lower hot stones so boiling rises without slopping. The surface turns glassy and then opalescent. Clear tallow collects on top and you skim it with a clean scoop into a waiting container. Maybe a small pottery jar, maybe a stomach liner vessel. Later that fat greases stone tools, polishes bowstrings, smothers sparks into char shines, wooden ladles, and most dear enriches lean stews when winter tells long jokes. On the coast, rendered eulachon or seal oil serves a similar ra with a flavor that tastes like tide and smoke learning to cooperate. Names attach themselves to the work because names make it human. Blackfoot stories remember buffalo jumps where the people ate well and worked harder still, a rhythm of gratitude and labor. Haida and Tlingit smokehouses breathe in damp air, cedar's sweetness waking even on gray days. In the subarctic Diné camps, stretch hides on airy frames while willow racks carry strips through a smoke thin enough to see your hand through. Farther east, Cree families talk quietly over simmering kettles as marrow melts and bones give up their whisper of mineral to broth. Each region has a way that grows from weather animals and wood. And each way is a promise kept to the next hungry mouth. Little efficiencies add up to miles of spare energy over a winter. Bones roasted for marrow get cracked and simmered again. The broth becomes a base that makes modest meals behave like feasts. Hot stone boiling in a wooden trough lets you simmer even when clay is scarce or you're traveling. Clean snow cools rendered fat quickly so it sets clear. Smoke from punky wood is a liar. You prefer steady coals and green boughs that give the kind of smoke that cures rather than coats. You hang strips so they don't touch air, must have its say, and you turn them like pages so one side doesn't gossip while the other sulks. Interactive nudge for anyone listening under a blanket. What's your nothing wasted habit at home, saving Parmesan rinds for soup? Turning stale bread into crumbs, freezing stock bones. Imagine scaling that habit to a whole community and a whole animal. You've just designed a winter. By the time the moon finds a hole in the clouds and leans an elbow on it, the camp smells like agreements being kept. Racks glow softly. Bowls ring faint when a ladle taps hides. Crackle a little as they dry on frames and someone is humming where sinew threads are being split with a thumbnail. Your fingers shine with a trace of fat and cedar. You glance toward the central fire where a small pot murmurs bone broth, steadying itself for tomorrow's stew, and you feel the right words gather with the steam because a meal like this isn't just calories. It's a way of remembering who gets thanked, who gets served first, and what it means to belong. You don't just eat, you arrive. Someone has already raked coals into a low, steady glow and brushed a circle clear as if sweeping a stage. The air smells like cedar and warm stone. A bowl passes to your hands with the quiet authority of a drum beat. Before anyone lifts a bite, a voice rises, not loud, just sure, and thanks every helper you can name. And a few you forgot: the water that carries fish, the corn that climbed a pole, the fire that behaves when spoken to with respect. You feel the room's shoulders drop. It's not a rule, it's a reset. Here, corn isn't a side dish. It's a prayer braided in 3 voices. Corn climbs beans, binds squash shades, the old alliance that you can taste, not memorize. In some longhouses, the words that come before all else are spoken. A thanksgiving that names waters, winds, plants, animals, sun, moon, stars, teachers, children, the extended guest list of the world. Ladle dips into corn soup that has been persuading beans and squash to get along all afternoon. The soup moves left to right, hand to hand, and you move with it, part of the choreography. You don't announce gratitude. You practice it with a spoon. Far south and east, when the corn ripens and tassels turn to silk, the first ears aren't gobbled. They're greeted. The green corn time comes with chores. Old ashes, emptied floors, scraped fires relit from a new central flame that says, begin again. People forgive debts and small offenses the way a field forgives footprints after rain. That first pot of hominy is tasted after words are said and breath is steady. Salt might be pinched from a small carved bowl. Meat may be thin-sliced and shared like a well-told story. You can call it a festival if you want. The people at the fire call it the right way to step into a new harvest. Travel west and north until water becomes the boss of the schedule, and a salmon is treated like a guest of honor with a very specific seat. At the first salmon meal, the earliest fish of the run is cooked carefully and shared widely, while elders notice whether the flesh holds fat, whether the timing feels right. Bones are returned to the water with ceremony, sometimes carried in a canoe, sometimes placed where current can read them. The message is plain: you are wanted back. We will behave as if we deserve you. Smoke curls through cedar planks as if writing those words into the air. When your bite flakes under your fingers, you don't praise the cook alone. You praise the agreement that made this bite possible. In house rests along the cold coasts and rivers, fat becomes its own grammar of respect. When Uletian grease appears, a carved spoon may be passed with a pause and a few drops brushed on dried fish or eaten with berries. The taste is bright and deep, a flavor that makes other tastes sit up straighter. The spoon itself carries reputation. You don't gulp, you honor. If you're thinking specialty oil, you're missing the point. It's shared calories that remember 1,000 winters and the river that braided them together. On plains that carry thunder, a bison didn't arrive alone. It brought obligations. Certain cuts go first to certain hands. Elders, children, the person who made the clean, first strike the family that prepared the drive. Tongue hump, marrow rib, the map of distribution is social, not just anatomical. You roast meat high over coals so it gathers tenderness without smoke turning greedy. When strips are dry and the smell flutters like a flag over the racks, some becomes road food, some becomes feast, and some mixed with berries and fat becomes next month's safety. A small dish of rendered tallow is set near the fire like a candle that feeds back the light it borrowed. In canyon towns where the walls keep cool secrets, feast days tether food to story. Corn dances bring color to plazas. Blue corn piki rolls so thin you can see light through them, smeared on a hot stone with speed that looks like magic until you notice the repetition behind it. Stews of mutton and squash linger in clay pots, and the line between meal and ceremony blurs in a way that makes both better. You eat quietly, a little slower than usual, part of a gathered breath that includes song dust, sun, and the scuff of soles on stone. Up where ice presses its face against the window and breath turns to cloud at the door. A first seal or caribou comes into camp accompanied by rules that feel like kindness disguised as protocol. The distribution pattern is older than anyone present. Certain parts travel to neighbors, some to elders whose joints gossip in winter. Some to the household whose luck was lean last week. A bowl of broth, deep, faintly sweet with bone, moves around the room. And you watch steam lift from mouths and remember why soup is a universal language. Lamps fed with rendered oil make a tender light on cheekbones. Meat cut with slate or steel makes no difference to the gravity of the moment. Across these places, smoke does double duty, kitchen and messenger. A pinch of meal flicked into the flames. A first piece